Emma's first day at Westwood High was one she'd never forget, though she wished she could. She wore her best outfit, a plain blue dress that she'd carefully ironed the night before, and a pair of scuffed shoes she'd polished to look as new as possible. The students, with their bright smiles and confidence, filled the halls, each clique seeming to have an unspoken understanding of where they belonged. As she walked down the corridor to her homeroom, she could feel their eyes on her, assessing and judging her simple attire. She looked down, clutching her bag tightly, hoping no one would notice the nerves and embarrassment prickling at her skin. But Brian did notice. Brian Peterson, tall, well-dressed, and undeniably popular, saw Emma immediately and felt his lips curl into a smirk. To him, Emma was an easy target, a nobody who clearly didn't belong in his carefully curated world. He leaned over to his friends and whispered something, sending a wave of laughter through their group that echoed down the hall. "Didn't realize we had a charity case in our class," he muttered loudly enough for her to hear as she passed by. His words hit her like a slap, causing her cheeks to burn with shame. Emma forced herself to keep walking, feeling her heart sink lower with each step. By the time she sat down in her seat, Emma's excitement for her first day had been replaced with dread. She tried to focus on the teacher's voice, but her mind kept replaying Brian's sneering comment, twisting like a knife. What had she done to deserve this? She'd simply shown up, hoping for a fresh start, a chance to make friends and maybe, just maybe, feel like she belonged somewhere. Yet here she was, already marked as different, less than. At lunch, Emma quietly found a seat in the far corner of the cafeteria. She unfolded her lunch, carefully packed by her mom, hoping to eat in peace. But Brian spotted her, and with a gleeful look, he strolled over, flanked by his friends. "What's on the menu today, Emma?" "Charity sandwiches?" he sneered, causing his friends to burst into laughter. Emma could barely manage a whispered "Please, leave me alone," but her plea was drowned out by their taunting. That night, as she lay in bed, Emma stared up at the ceiling, wondering how she'd survive the rest of the school year. But somewhere, beneath her humiliation and sadness, a tiny spark ignited, a glimmer of resilience. She knew that she'd have to find a way to endure, to rise above the cruelty. And as she drifted into a restless sleep, she clung to that fragile spark, hoping it would guide her through whatever lay ahead. Emma walked into school the next morning with her head down, wishing she could blend into the walls. The thought of seeing Brian and his friends made her stomach twist. Yet, as she made her way to her locker, she felt a soft tap on her shoulder. It was Mia, a quiet girl from her homeroom who often sat alone during lunch. She looked at Emma with kind eyes, a gentle smile breaking the silence between them. "Hi, Emma," Mia said softly, her voice steady and sincere. "I saw what happened yesterday. I just wanted to say, don't let them get to you. They're not worth it." Emma was taken aback by Mia's kindness. No one had ever gone out of their way to offer her comfort, and in that moment, Mia's words felt like a balm to her bruised spirit. Grateful, Emma smiled back, feeling a sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. From that day forward, Mia became Emma's quiet anchor. She didn't stand up to Brian or make a grand show of support, but her simple presence and warm, understanding words made Emma's days a bit brighter. The two would exchange brief conversations in the hall, and though Mia didn't always sit with Emma, she would offer a comforting smile from across the room. Emma realized that sometimes, it was the small moments of kindness that could make all the difference. The days dragged on, and although Mia's friendship gave Emma some solace, the constant taunting from Brian and his friends was relentless. They found every opportunity to belittle her, throwing snide remarks and laughter her way whenever they crossed paths. Each insult chipped away at her self-esteem, leaving her feeling more isolated with each passing day. Brian seemed to take a cruel pleasure in reminding her of her differences, and his friends followed suit, eager to stay on his good side. Emma often wondered why they targeted her. She was quiet, kept to herself, and did nothing to warrant their scorn. Yet, she was beginning to understand that Brian's cruelty had less to do with her and more to do with his own insecurities. It was a thought that brought her little comfort, though, as each encounter left her feeling smaller, more invisible, like a ghost haunting the hallways of Westwood High. But there was one thing that kept her grounded: her love for music. When things felt too heavy, Emma would retreat to her small bedroom, pull out her mother's old guitar, and let the melodies wash over her. The music allowed her to escape, to feel seen and heard in a way she never did at school. Singing was her sanctuary, a place where Brian's cruel words couldn't reach her, where she could be her true self. One afternoon, as Emma shared her struggles with Mia over lunch, Mia's eyes lit up with an idea. "Why don't you sing in the school's talent show?" she suggested, her excitement contagious. "You're amazing, Emma. You've got a voice that deserves to be heard." Emma hesitated, feeling a mix of fear and intrigue. The thought of standing on stage terrified her, especially with Brian and his friends in the audience, but Mia's encouragement gave her pause. For days, Emma wrestled with the idea. Part of her wanted to prove to herself, and maybe even to others, that she wasn't just the girl everyone looked down on. But another part of her feared the humiliation that could follow. Brian's mocking voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of every taunt, every sneer. And yet, Mia's words lingered too, planting a small seed of hope that maybe, just maybe, this could be her chance to change things. After much internal debate, Emma decided to take a leap of faith. She signed up for the talent show, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and dread. The days that followed were filled with secret rehearsals, as she poured her heart into preparing for her performance. Singing had always been her escape, but now, it felt like a lifeline, a chance to step into the light, even if just for a moment. The school buzzed with excitement as the talent show approached. Posters lined the hallways, and students chatted eagerly about who they thought would steal the spotlight. Brian's mocking glance found Emma each time they crossed paths, his smirk deepening when he learned she had signed up. "Can't wait to see you up there, Emma," he sneered, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Emma's hands clenched as she walked away, refusing to let him intimidate her. She tried to focus on the music, letting it drown out his voice and the doubts it stirred. She knew this performance would be a defining moment, whether it ended in triumph or disaster. With Mia's unwavering support, Emma held on to the hope that her talent could shine through, no matter what Brian might say or do. The day of the talent show loomed closer, and Emma poured herself into her rehearsals, determined to be ready. Every time she sang, she reminded herself of her worth, of her voice, and of the dream that she had carried silently within her heart. She knew this was her chance to be seen, not as a target of ridicule, but as someone with something beautiful to share. Emma found a small, unused room near the music wing where she could practice without interruption. She spent her lunch hours there, away from the judging eyes of her classmates. She sang softly at first, letting her voice grow bolder as the days passed. Each practice session became a ritual, a place where she could shed her insecurities and reconnect with the part of her that still believed in herself. The music filled her with a sense of purpose and possibility, lifting her spirits in ways she hadn't felt in months. In that small, quiet room, Emma became someone else, someone who was unafraid, someone who belonged. As she practiced, she allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to stand on stage, her voice filling the auditorium, silencing her detractors. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt a spark of hope. Brian began to notice Emma's newfound confidence, and it irritated him. He was used to seeing her cower, used to her shrinking away from his taunts. But now, something had changed. Emma seemed less affected by his words, almost as if she were looking right through him. It bothered him in a way he couldn't quite understand. Why did her quiet defiance unsettle him so much? His irritation grew as the talent show drew nearer. To Brian, the idea of Emma taking the stage, of her being seen as something other than the charity case, felt like a personal insult. He began to plot ways to undermine her confidence, to remind her of where she belonged. He didn't fully understand why it mattered so much to him, but he knew he couldn't stand the thought of her succeeding. The day of the talent show arrived, and the school buzzed with anticipation. Emma waited backstage, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. She could hear the crowd murmuring, feel the electric tension in the air. This was her moment, the one she had prepared for, and despite her nerves, she felt a strange calm settle over her. But just before she went on, she noticed her microphone cord had been tampered with. She didn't need to turn around to know who was behind it. Brian snickering in the corner confirmed her suspicions. With shaking hands, she tried to fix the cord, but the damage was done. As she stepped onto the stage, the laughter and whispers from the audience were louder than her voice, drowning her in humiliation. Emma fled the stage, her face flushed with shame. She had wanted so desperately to prove herself, to be seen, but instead, she felt smaller than ever. Brian's laughter echoed in her mind, his words slicing through her fragile sense of self-worth. In that moment, she wanted nothing more than to disappear, to hide from the world that seemed so quick to mock her. Back in the quiet of her room, Emma allowed herself to cry. She thought of all the hours she had spent practicing, of Mia's encouragement, of the hopes she had dared to nurture. It all felt meaningless now, like a dream that had been shattered before it even had a chance to bloom. Yet, deep down, a small voice reminded her that this setback didn't define her, that she still had her voice, her dream. It was a thought she wasn't ready to embrace yet, but it lingered, waiting for her to be ready. That weekend, Emma wandered into a nearby park, needing a break from her thoughts. She sank onto a bench beneath the sprawling branches of an old oak tree, the early autumn leaves casting dappled shadows on her face. As she sat there, nursing her bruised spirit, she noticed an older man watching her, his gaze gentle yet curious. He wore a faded blue cap and had a kind smile, one that softened the creases around his eyes. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice warm. Startled, Emma nodded, managing a faint smile. She hesitated but then found herself confiding in him, recounting the talent show and Brian's cruelty. The man listened attentively, nodding as she spoke, and when she finished, he introduced himself as Mr. Caldwell, a retired music teacher. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "your voice is something precious. It would be a shame to let others silence it." Emma looked up, feeling a flicker of hope in his words. Mr. Caldwell offered to mentor her, his voice filled with a quiet assurance that made her feel safe. "Come by every Saturday," he said. "Let's work on building that voice of yours." For the first time since the talent show, Emma felt a spark reignite within her. She nodded, and as they parted ways, she realized that her journey wasn't over, it was just beginning. Emma eagerly anticipated her first Saturday session with Mr. Caldwell. When she arrived at the park, he was already there, seated on the same bench with a worn music book in his lap. He greeted her warmly and wasted no time in starting their lesson. Mr. Caldwell's teaching style was patient yet focused, and Emma quickly found herself absorbed in his instructions, forgetting the world around her. He pushed her to reach notes she hadn't dared attempt before, showing her breathing techniques and exercises that strengthened her voice. Under his guidance, Emma felt her confidence grow with each session. Mr. Caldwell's belief in her abilities was unshakable, and his support began to fill the holes left by Brian's taunts. For the first time in her life, Emma felt truly seen and valued for her talent. As weeks turned into months, Emma's voice grew stronger, more assured. With each lesson, she felt her spirit healing. Singing was no longer just a personal refuge, but something she wanted to share with the world. Mr. Caldwell encouraged her to pour her emotions into her music, teaching her how to convey a story with every note. She practiced day and night, feeling as if her dreams were slowly, surely coming within reach. One Saturday, Mr. Caldwell surprised her by inviting her to sing at a small community event. It wasn't a huge audience, just a handful of people, but for Emma, it was a big step. She took the stage with a mixture of fear and excitement, and as she sang, she saw the audience captivated by her voice. For the first time, Emma felt the power of her music touching others, and she realized she was stronger than the shame Brian had tried to impose upon her. Unbeknownst to Emma, life was taking a toll on Brian as well. His family, once a symbol of status and success, was facing financial troubles. His father's business had suffered a severe downturn, and suddenly, the world of luxury Brian had always taken for granted began to crumble. He found himself facing pressures and insecurities he'd never imagined. Brian's popularity at school began to fade as his confidence wavered. His former friends, quick to sense his vulnerability, distanced themselves. He started to realize that his value in their eyes had been tied to his status, not his character. For the first time, Brian understood the isolation that Emma had lived with all along, and he began to feel the weight of his own arrogance. Emma's confidence blossomed, reflecting the hard work and passion she poured into her music. She could feel herself transforming, shedding the insecurities that once held her back. At school, she walked the halls with her head held high, no longer afraid of Brian's gaze. His taunts had lost their power over her. Her focus was on her dream, on the voice that she was finally letting the world hear. With her newfound confidence, Emma even began performing at small venues and community events. She felt the thrill of connecting with her audience, watching as her music resonated with them. For the first time, Emma understood that her voice was more than just a skill, it was a gift, one that could move and inspire others. It was this realization that gave her the courage to dream bigger, to believe that her path was one worth following. Graduation day arrived, marking the end of a turbulent chapter in Emma's life. As she stood in her cap and gown, she felt a strange mix of relief and pride. The girl who had entered Westwood High, timid and afraid, had transformed into someone who could stand tall, unafraid of the world's judgment. Her journey wasn't over, but she knew she was ready for whatever lay ahead. As she accepted her diploma, she glanced across the crowd and caught sight of Brian, standing with his family. He looked different, quieter, almost as if he too was reflecting on the years gone by. Their eyes met for a fleeting moment, and though no words were exchanged, Emma sensed that life had changed him as well. As she walked off the stage, she felt a profound sense of closure, ready to step into the future. With graduation behind her, Emma took a long, last look at her high school, a place that had both broken and built her. She lingered in the empty halls, recalling moments of pain but also moments of growth. It was here she'd learned resilience, where she'd found her voice and her strength. She made a silent promise to herself that she would carry these lessons forward, never letting anyone diminish her again. She thought of Mia, Mr. Caldwell, and the kindnesses that had shaped her journey. As she left Westwood High for the final time, Emma knew that she was no longer defined by the insults she had endured. She was defined by her courage, her perseverance, and the voice she had reclaimed. She walked away from the school with a sense of peace, knowing that she had closed that chapter with grace. Emma applied to the renowned Harmony Music Academy, one of the top music institutions in the country. The audition process was rigorous, and she faced fierce competition. She spent weeks preparing, pouring everything she had into perfecting her pieces. When the audition day arrived, Emma felt a blend of excitement and nerves, her heart racing as she stepped onto the stage. She closed her eyes and began to sing, letting the music carry her fears away. The judges sat in silence, their faces unreadable, but Emma sang with everything in her soul, unburdened by doubts. When she finished, a profound silence filled the room before the judges began clapping, their applause echoing off the walls. Emma left the academy that day with a heart full of hope, feeling she had done her best. While Emma's dreams began to unfold, Brian's world continued to crumble. His father's business declared bankruptcy, and the family was forced to move to a smaller home. His friends, who had once flocked to him, no longer seemed interested in his company. Alone and humbled, Brian struggled to adjust to this new life, wrestling with feelings of shame and failure. Without the privileges he once took for granted, Brian faced a harsh reality that left him vulnerable. He thought back to Emma and how he had belittled her for the very struggles he now experienced. The realization filled him with regret, and for the first time, he began to question who he had been, reflecting on the harm his words had inflicted on others. At the academy, Emma continued to grow. Surrounded by talented musicians, she pushed herself to new heights, learning to refine her voice and master her craft. The atmosphere at the academy was intense, and while she faced many challenges, she embraced each one, knowing that every step brought her closer to her dreams. Her fellow students admired her dedication, and she formed friendships with people who shared her passion for music. For the first time, Emma felt that she truly belonged, that she was part of something larger than herself. Each performance, each lesson, reinforced the belief that she had something special to offer the world. The shy girl who once shrank from the spotlight was gone, replaced by a confident young woman ready to share her gift. One evening, Emma attended a charity gala organized by her music academy. As she mingled with the crowd, she noticed a familiar face across the room, Brian. He looked different, more reserved, a shadow of the arrogant boy he once was. Caught off guard, Emma felt a surge of emotions, surprise, empathy, and a faint flicker of the old pain. Brian noticed her too, and their eyes met. For a moment, he looked like he might turn away, but then he approached her, visibly nervous. "Emma," he said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. It's been a while." Emma nodded, her heart racing as she wondered what this encounter would bring. There was something different in his gaze, a humility she hadn't seen before. As they spoke, Brian confessed to the mistakes he'd made, his words filled with regret. "I'm sorry, Emma. I know how much I hurt you. I didn't understand back then, but now I do." His voice wavered, and Emma saw a vulnerability in him that was new, a rawness that spoke of genuine remorse. For the first time, Brian admitted his faults, acknowledging the pain he had caused. Emma listened, a swirl of emotions coursing through her. She felt the weight of his apology and realized that, though she'd moved on, his words held a healing power she hadn't anticipated. She didn't say anything at first, but as the silence stretched, she nodded, offering him a small smile. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, and in that moment, the past's hold on her began to loosen. In the days following their conversation, Emma found herself reflecting on Brian's apology. She hadn't expected to feel so many conflicting emotions, relief, closure, and even compassion. She remembered the hurt he'd caused her, but she also recognized the transformation he had undergone. For the first time, she saw Brian as someone who, like her, had faced his own struggles and emerged different on the other side. When they crossed paths again at the academy, she decided to extend a hand of friendship. "It's good to see you doing well, Brian," she said warmly. They talked easily, like old acquaintances who had both experienced life's harsh lessons. Slowly, their conversations grew deeper, touching on dreams, regrets, and the growth they both experienced. Emma began to feel a sense of peace, knowing that her forgiveness was not just a gift to Brian but also a release for herself. One crisp autumn afternoon, Emma and Brian found themselves walking along a tree-lined path near the academy. The trees had shed most of their leaves, creating a carpet of red and gold beneath their feet. They stopped by a bench, and Brian, after a long pause, opened up about his family's fall from grace, the guilt he felt, and the bitterness that had shaped him. For the first time, he admitted how insecure he had been, always afraid that someone would see through his confident facade. Emma listened intently, her heart softening as she realized the depth of his pain. She shared her own journey, the countless hours she'd spent with Mr. Caldwell, finding her voice and reclaiming her self-worth. Their stories mirrored each other in unexpected ways, and by the time the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma felt as though she had seen a different side of Brian, a side she could finally accept as real. After that afternoon, Emma knew it was time to fully release the hurt she had carried for so long. Brian's apology had been genuine, and though the memories of his cruelty still lingered, they no longer held power over her. She had built herself up from those broken pieces, and forgiving him felt like the final step in her journey. When she saw him next, she took a deep breath and said, "Brian, I forgive you." Brian's eyes filled with gratitude, and he nodded, as if a weight had been lifted from him as well. "Thank you, Emma. I don't deserve it, but thank you." They shared a quiet moment, both of them aware of how far they had come. Emma knew that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, it meant choosing peace, choosing to move forward unburdened. It was a choice she was finally ready to make. Emma and Brian continued to see each other occasionally at events and around campus. Their friendship grew, built on a mutual respect and an understanding of the pain and growth they had both endured. Brian began volunteering at a local community center, teaching underprivileged children, and Emma admired the humility and purpose he brought to his work. She could see the positive changes in him, changes she never would have thought possible. Through their friendship, they supported one another, cheering each other on through challenges and celebrating each other's achievements. Emma found herself grateful for this unexpected connection, one that had transformed from bitterness to friendship, from pain to peace. For both of them, this new bond became a symbol of how far they'd come and how much they'd changed. Brian's work at the community center became a profound source of fulfillment for him. He poured his energy into helping the children there, showing them the kindness and encouragement he wished he'd had. He helped them with schoolwork, listened to their stories, and inspired them to believe in themselves. In doing so, he felt a sense of purpose he'd never known before. One day, after leading a group of kids in a basketball game, he looked around at their smiling faces and felt a quiet pride. He had found a way to use his past mistakes as fuel for good, to make amends in a way that was meaningful. The children looked up to him, and in their eyes, he saw a reflection of his own growth. Brian knew he couldn't change the past, but he could shape his future, and that realization gave him peace. Emma's hard work at the academy began to pay off as she gained recognition for her talent and dedication. Her performances became more refined, her voice more powerful, and her name started to spread beyond the academy. She was invited to perform at a prestigious concert, her first major opportunity to sing on a prominent stage. The night before the concert, she sat backstage, feeling the weight of her journey pressing down on her. As she took the stage, her mind drifted back to all the moments that had led her here, the loneliness, the resilience, the lessons from Mr. Caldwell, and the unexpected bond with Brian. As she began to sing, she let her voice carry every emotion she had ever felt, filling the hall with a resonance that left the audience breathless. When she finished, the applause was thunderous, and Emma knew in her heart that this was just the beginning. Some months later, Emma received an invitation from her old high school. They wanted her to speak at the school's graduation ceremony, to inspire the next generation with her story. The idea stirred a mix of emotions. She hadn't set foot in those hallways since her last day as a student, and she wasn't sure how it would feel to return. But as she considered the opportunity, she felt it was time to revisit her past, to see it with fresh eyes. Standing on the same stage where she had once faced humiliation, Emma delivered her speech. She spoke of resilience, of the courage to chase dreams despite adversity, and of the power of kindness. Looking out at the students, she saw her younger self in their faces and felt a swell of pride. She had turned her pain into purpose, and standing there, she knew her story had come full circle. Emma's career continued to flourish, and one evening, she attended a grand award ceremony where she was being honored for her contributions to music and her advocacy for young artists. Brian, who had followed her success, attended the event to support her. He watched from the crowd as she took the stage, radiant and poised, receiving the award with humility and gratitude. As she thanked those who had helped her along the way, she caught sight of Brian in the audience, offering him a nod and a warm smile. She knew that their journey, filled with hardships and redemption, had shaped both of them in ways neither could have imagined. They had each found their own version of success, and in that moment, Emma felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the unexpected path her life had taken. With her success, Emma dedicated herself to giving back, using her platform to support young musicians who, like her, had once felt overlooked and underestimated. She started a foundation to provide scholarships for aspiring artists, ensuring that no child's dreams would be stifled by circumstance. Her performances, now celebrated globally, resonated with people from all walks of life, each song a testament to the resilience that had brought her here. As for Brian, he continued his work at the community center, mentoring children and helping them navigate their own challenges. He found joy in seeing the kids grow, knowing that he was making a difference. He had once been broken, but through Emma's forgiveness and his own redemption, he had found peace and purpose. Their lives intertwined in unexpected ways. Emma and Brian became symbols of resilience and growth. Their friendship, born out of pain and shaped by forgiveness, reminded them both of how far they had come. And as Emma sang on stages across the world, she carried with her a legacy of compassion, strength, and the unbreakable power of dreams.